Welcome to the Radiology Review Podcast, your on-the-go source for radiology education with your host, Dr. Matt Covington, a board-certified radiologist. Please follow the podcast on Twitter at RadRevPodcast. Send emails to theradiologyreview@gmail.com or visit the website theradiologyreview.com.
For those of you getting ready to take the ABR Core examination, I want to share a few tips with you. First of all, you have two options on where to take the examination. One is in Tucson and the other is in Chicago. I have taken examinations at both of these sites, and I can tell you overall the experience in Tucson is better. One reason why Tucson is better is that the examination center is immediately next to hotels that you can stay at and restaurants. On the other hand, when you take the examination in Chicago, there are a block of hotels you can stay at, but unbeknownst to me, when you get to the hotel and on the morning of the examination, you actually have to take a fairly lengthy bus ride to reach the ABR testing center in Chicago. I found it's much nicer in Tucson to either drive and park directly in front of the testing center or else walk from one of many hotels that are right there at the testing center. I also found the experience getting from the airport to the testing center to be more relaxed in Tucson, and your ability to study the night before the examination is also probably better in Tucson than Chicago. In general, Tucson is a little bit smaller city, a little bit less stressful to navigate around, and the testing center experience is more relaxed, which I find beneficial. Both testing centers, whether Tucson or Chicago, do provide you with a locker to store some of your belongings. At the testing center, both sites will provide earplugs, water bottles, a dry erase board, and a dry erase marker that you can use during the examination. I found the facilities in the testing center to be very comparable in terms of the locker and break space, the testing center and environment, and the bathrooms. The ABR Core exam does take 2 days. The first day you are allotted 7.5 hours, and the second day 6 hours, according to the ABR website. From my experience, most test takers do take the majority of the time on each day. On each day, you also receive 30 minutes of break time, which may not feel like a lot, but I did think that was sufficient. One trick is to know that if you do the online instructions ahead of time, you can actually buy yourself several extra break minutes on each day. The total number of questions currently on the ABR Core examination is 657. Remember that in addition to physics and your radiology questions in each subspecialty area, you also have questions on the radioisotope safety exam. For short, that is called RISE, R-I-S-E, which is a requirement to become an authorized user. I plan to provide an audio summary of key RISE concepts later on. An additional resource that is very useful for this is the chapter on radiation safety in Frank Mettler's nuclear medicine book that probably every residency program in the country has available. I found that to be an excellent resource. In general, I won't recommend any single source, but for the RISE portion, I think anybody would agree that that might be one of the best sources out there. Also remember the non-interpretive skills section, which is a unique entity in that the ABR actually provides a study guide that is updated regularly for the examination. You should read and understand this. I plan to also provide some audio summaries on that topic as well. I have to tell you, I'm not necessarily looking forward to that because I find the non-interpretive skills section very dry. Nonetheless, it is a very important area to be proficient at when you come to take the ABR Core examination. And one advantage you have in that area compared to others is that the ABR is telling you specifically what they want. Be aware that the ABR has provided a core practice exam online. You can find this at the ABR website. The practice exam mirrors the actual software interface that you see in the testing center, and it is very useful, and I would say requisite that you do this ahead of time. The practice exam also has a tutorial on how the software works, and if you're familiar with how the software works, you can click faster through the actual tutorial on the day of the test, and at least when I took the examination, this time can be added to your break time, which is helpful. My suggestion when taking the core practice exam is not to approach it so much in terms of whether you have the knowledge base necessary to do well on the core exam, although it does provide some feedback, but rather to look at the types of questions they are giving you and how they ask the questions. Also pay attention to how you can interact with the actual software for the examination. For example, some questions allow you to actually click on an image to show where the image finding is. I'm guessing the practice questions will have some that illustrate that to you. Also get familiar with how to zoom on images, how to navigate through images, how to scroll, how to watch video or cine clips. All of those things are important. I can tell you from my experience in general, the image quality on the ABR Core exam is good, but not universally perfect. Some of the images are displayed too small, so it is important to know how to enlarge these quickly on your screen. I also found at times that the cine or video clips go through very quickly, so it's good to see how you can pause the scroll bar and scroll at your own speed through the images to evaluate more carefully what imaging finding they may be showing you. My suggestion is to take the ABR Core examination practice test probably about a month before the test. Lastly, in terms of board study materials, there's an abundance of study material available to you, most of which is high quality. I think it could be easy to get overwhelmed with the vast amount of study guides and materials that you can find, whether buying an actual book or a QBank online or other websites, resources, practice tests. My suggestion in general is to find one good resource for each subspecialty area and focus on that. Once you feel like you have mastered that resource, move on to another one if you have time or if you feel you need more help in that area. I think you do yourself a disservice if you plan to get through more material than is possible. For example, for cardiac imaging, select one established resource and get through that well. I think that will serve you better than getting through portions of 5 separate resources where you may have gaps in what you learn due to not completely getting through any single resource. Also, I think it is important to have a mix of different study preparation material in terms of having some study preparation with question banks throughout your board study while also spending time reading and going through actual study guides. My motivation in providing this podcast to you is to fill in the gaps in terms of your schedule to allow more time for board preparation to occur. For example, you cannot be reading a book easily while you run or take a bike ride outside. However, you can listen to an audio summary. You are able to learn from an audio source while you are out on the go. I hope a few of these tips will be helpful to you. Now back to the learning. Content of this podcast is provided for informal educational purposes only for radiology trainees and radiologists. Medical practitioners, please make your own independent assessment before suggesting a diagnosis or recommending any course of treatment. This podcast should not be used for self-diagnosis or self-treatment and is not a substitute for independent professional medical care. Please consult your own physician regarding any diagnosis, imaging interpretation, or course of treatment.